Have you ever been told you don't belong in a place you worked hard to earn? Imagine sitting in the seat you paid for, ready to go home, when a stranger walks in and suddenly you're asked to move, not because of a mistake, not because of safety, but because someone else was seen as more important than you. That's what happened to Nathan Cole, a respected black CEO, quietly traveling after closing one of the biggest deals of his life. In that moment, he faced a choice: comply and disappear, or stand firm and risk humiliation in front of a cabin full of strangers. What would you do if the world demanded you give up your place just to make someone else comfortable? Would you swallow the insult, or would you decide that respect isn't negotiable? Tonight, you'll witness how one man's calm defiance turned a single seat into a national reckoning, and why his story refuses to be ignored. If you believe dignity matters, stay with us. And before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear stories that truly matter. Have you ever been asked to give up something you rightfully paid for, just so someone else, someone labeled as more important, could take it from you? It's a moment that feels small on the surface, but inside, it strikes at something far deeper. That's exactly what was about to happen to Nathan Cole on a Wednesday afternoon at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The terminal buzzed with the usual chorus of rolling suitcases, gate announcements, and hurried footsteps. Business travelers glanced at their watches, parents tried to corral children, and couples spoke softly over coffee cups. Amid the noise, Nathan Cole moved with a quiet presence. He was 50 years old, broad-shouldered but not imposing, dressed in a dark charcoal blazer over a plain white shirt, dark slacks, and well-kept brown loafers. Nothing flashy, no entourage. Just a leather briefcase in one hand and a slim carry-on in the other. If you passed him, you might think he was a mid-level manager or maybe a professor heading home from a conference. But Nathan Cole was far more than that. He was the founder and CEO of Cole Systems, a company whose technology quietly powered the operations of several major airlines. Flight scheduling, maintenance checks, even the ticketing platform that passengers used every day, it all ran on software his company had built. That afternoon, Nathan wasn't thinking about business. He had just returned from a week of negotiations in Phoenix, closing one of the biggest contracts of his career. He was tired, longing for a quiet seat, maybe a bourbon before takeoff. His mind was set on something simple: peace. When the announcement for first-class boarding came, Nathan stood and walked calmly toward the gate. The scanner beeped, the attendant smiled, and he stepped onto the jet bridge. The familiar whoosh of cool, recycled air met him as he entered the aircraft. He found his seat quickly, 1A. It wasn't just a number on his boarding pass. For Nathan, 1A meant stability. It was where he'd sat on countless flights across decades of travel. Window view, extra legroom, and the feeling that he could settle in and let the world move around him. He set down his briefcase, slid his phone into the side pocket, and leaned back. The cabin smelled faintly of citrus cleaner, and the leather headrest felt cool against his hand. For a moment, it was exactly what he needed: familiar, routine, safe. But peace, he would soon learn, never lasts as long as you expect. 2 rows behind him, a tall young man with sandy blonde hair entered with a casual swagger. He wore a pale blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up, sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. He carried himself as if he were the center of gravity in the room, even though he was just another passenger. Nathan barely noticed him at first, but within minutes, that man would become the trigger for an encounter Nathan would never forget. The flight attendants bustled through their pre-boarding checks. Their voices were hushed but efficient, their movements practiced. Nathan adjusted his seatbelt and exhaled. That's when he noticed one of the attendants pausing at his row. She was petite, with sharp features and a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name badge read Sophie Turner. She clasped her hands in front of her and spoke in a voice that carried both formality and unease. "Mr. Cole," she began softly, "we're going to need you to switch seats for a moment. There's been a mix-up." Nathan blinked, certain he hadn't heard her right. "I'm sorry, this is my seat. It's right here on my boarding pass." Sophie's eyes flicked briefly over her shoulder, where the sandy-haired young man was now leaning casually against the galley wall, arms folded as though waiting for a show to begin. "Yes, I understand, sir," Sophie said quickly, "but this gentleman was supposed to have this seat reserved. He's one of our Platinum Elite members. It would make things easier if you could take another seat in first class, just a few rows back." Nathan's eyebrows tightened. He knew how airline seating worked. There was no such thing as a reservation that could overwrite a confirmed first-class ticket. This wasn't a clerical error. This was something else. The young man, Bradley Stone, though Nathan didn't know his name, yet watched the exchange with a faint smirk. He didn't offer to intervene, didn't suggest it wasn't a big deal. His silence spoke volumes. He expected this to go his way. Nathan sat straighter. His voice remained calm, even. "I booked this weeks ago. First class, seat 1A. I don't understand why I should move now." Sophie shifted uneasily. "It's just, he's a very frequent flyer with us. If you could accommodate him, it would help us out." The words hung in the air. A few passengers glanced up from their seats, pretending not to listen, but clearly following. Nathan could feel the current of curiosity sweeping through the cabin. "Finally," he asked quietly, "and where would you put me?" Sophie hesitated, then said, "Seat 3C, still first class. It's not much different." But it was different, Nathan thought, not because of legroom or service, but because of what it represented. Seat 1A wasn't just comfort. It was a place he had earned, a place he had paid for. The young man didn't want it for convenience. He wanted it for the symbol of priority. And right now, the airline seemed willing to push Nathan aside to give it to him. Nathan's chest tightened. Memories flashed the networking dinners where people mistook him for an assistant instead of the owner. The boardrooms where they overlooked him until his name appeared on the contract. Decades of being underestimated, dismissed, told to wait his turn. He had learned to pick his battles, but he had also learned that some moments mattered more than others. Some moments weren't just about a seat on an airplane. They were about who you were and what you allowed others to decide about you. Nathan took a slow breath. Then he looked Sophie directly in the eye. "I'm not moving," he said. His tone was calm, but it left no room for negotiation. Sophie gave a tight nod, lips pressed thin, and walked back toward the galley. Nathan could hear muffled voices, hers and another crew member's, before she returned with a clipped smile. "All right, Mr. Cole," she said. "We'll see what we can do." She turned and walked away. Nathan leaned back against the leather headrest, muscles tense despite his outward calm. He could feel the eyes of the young man burning into him, the silent challenge written across his smirk. Nathan didn't yet know it, but this was only the first move in a game that would soon pull the entire cabin into its orbit. The hum of passengers boarding filled the cabin. Bags slid into overhead bins, seatbelts clicked, and the steady shuffle of shoes against the carpet created a rhythm Nathan had heard on 1,000 flights before. But this time, something in that rhythm felt broken. Nathan adjusted his briefcase under the seat and pulled out a folder. He wasn't planning to work, but having it nearby gave him comfort, a reminder of who he was and what he had built. He tried to focus on the calm outside the window, the distant movement of baggage carts, the blinking lights of nearby planes. but he could feel it. The unease. The shift. 2 rows back. Bradley Stone lowered himself into a seat by the galley, still watching Nathan like a hawk circling prey. His posture was relaxed, too relaxed, like a man confident the game was already won. His phone glowed in his hand, and he scrolled through it without looking up. Nathan wasn't a stranger to that look. He had seen it in conference rooms when competitors underestimated him. He had seen it at dinners when someone assumed he was staff instead of the keynote speaker. That casual smirk of entitlement, the kind that said, "You don't belong here." "But I do?" Sophie Turner returned, this time with another crew member, a tall man in his early 40s with a brisk, no-nonsense demeanor. His name tag read, Alan Pierce. He carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Mr. Cole," Alan said firmly, leaning toward Nathan's row. "I'm afraid there's been a seating miscommunication. We need you to relocate so that this passenger," he nodded toward Bradley, "can take his assigned spot." Nathan closed his folder and looked up. His expression stayed even, though his pulse quickened. "Assigned spot," Nathan repeated quietly. "My ticket says 1A. I boarded with 1A. What exactly are you suggesting?" Alan shifted, clearly unused to being challenged. "It's important for our operations today that Mr. Stone be seated in 1A. We have another seat for you just a few rows back." Nathan let the words sink in. Important for our operations. He almost smiled at the absurdity, as if the airline's safety depended on Bradley's comfort. Before he could answer, Bradley finally stepped forward. He flashed a thin smile, speaking as though they were discussing a casual favor. "Listen, man, I fly this airline every week. Seat 1A is my spot. It's nothing personal." Nathan studied him. The arrogance wasn't in the words themselves, but in the delivery, the assumption that Nathan would simply fold. "Nothing personal," Nathan said slowly, "is exactly what it becomes when you expect me to give up a seat I paid for, just because you want it." The air thickened instantly. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some looked down, pretending not to listen, while others glanced back and forth between the 2 men like spectators at a match. Sophie raised her hand slightly. "Gentlemen, please. We can resolve this without what a voice cut in sharply." It came from across the aisle. An older woman, gray hair neatly tied back, looked straight at Sophie. Her voice was strong, the kind of tone that demanded respect. Without making a scene, she said, "Because from where I'm sitting, the scene isn't coming from him." She pointed at Nathan. "It's coming from you, asking a paying passenger to give up his rightful seat." Sophie's lips tightened. She didn't reply. Nathan glanced at the woman and gave the faintest nod of thanks. He didn't know her name yet, but her support landed like a steadying hand on his shoulder. A man 2 rows ahead joined in, his voice level but clear. "The ticket decides the seat. End of story." The words spread through the cabin like a spark. People murmured, some nodding in agreement, others frowning at the delay. Alan Pierce, however, wasn't swayed. His jaw set, his tone hardening. "If you don't cooperate, sir, we may have to delay departure. That's not fair to the other passengers." Nathan leaned back slightly, his eyes steady on Alan. "If that's what it takes," he said calmly, "then I guess we're delaying." "Because I'm not moving." A ripple went through the cabin. Some muttered under their breath, annoyed at the possibility of being late, but others straightened in their seats, their faces reflecting a quiet admiration. Bradley's smirk faded for the first time. His jaw tightened as he stepped back, pulling out his phone as though to distract himself. Sophie and Alan exchanged a quick glance before walking briskly back toward the galley. Nathan exhaled slowly, his muscles taut beneath the surface. He had stood his ground, but he knew this wasn't over. This kind of standoff didn't just vanish. They would try again, and when they did, it wouldn't be quiet. Minutes later, the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice came over the speaker, polite but heavy with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're finalizing our seating arrangements and will be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." Nathan caught the phrase, "finalizing our seating arrangements." It echoed in his head like a warning bell. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't finished. And something told him their next move would be far more public, far more humiliating. Nathan leaned against the window, staring out at the tarmac lights blinking in the dusk. His reflection in the glass looked calm, but inside, his thoughts spun. He remembered moments from years ago being told he couldn't enter a club until his colleagues vouched for him, watching contracts nearly slip away because clients assumed he was support staff. Each memory left scars, small but lasting. Now here he was again, sitting in a seat he had paid for, being told he didn't belong. He whispered to himself, so quietly only he could hear, "Not this time." The engines rumbled faintly as the crew finished preparations, but Nathan's mind was already bracing for what came next. The cabin was full now. Every overhead bin was shut, every safety card tucked back into its slot. But the energy in the air didn't feel like the usual pre-flight calm. It felt strained, unsettled. Nathan could sense it as clearly as the vibration of the engines humming beneath the floor. He adjusted his seatbelt and tried to focus on the view outside the window, fuel trucks moving like ants across the concrete, the fading light of the Texas evening. But inside, his thoughts tightened into a knot. He had faced these moments before, moments where silence seemed easier. He had taken the smaller seat, ignored the slight, convinced himself that peace was more valuable than pride. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the casual arrogance of Bradley Stone, still lounging just a few rows back with that same smug look. Maybe it was the way Sophie Turner avoided his eyes, as if she knew this wasn't right but wasn't willing to say it aloud. Or maybe it was the quiet nod of support from Helen Brooks, the older woman across the aisle who had spoken up when others stayed silent. Whatever it was, Nathan knew this was a line he couldn't retreat from. He didn't have to wait long for the next move. Alan Pierce reappeared, his expression clipped, his voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "Mr. Cole," he said, "this is the last time I'll ask politely. We need you to move to seat 3C. If you don't comply, we may have to delay the flight, and if that continues, you will be removed from the aircraft." The words landed heavy in the cabin. Removed. It was no longer about inconvenience. It was about humiliation. Before Nathan could answer, Bradley leaned forward from the galley area, his tone dripping with mock courtesy. "Come on, man. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Everyone just wants to get going." Nathan turned his head slowly, his gaze steady. "The only thing making this harder," he said evenly, "is entitlement dressed up as policy." A murmur ran through first class. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing the confrontation would end. Others leaned in, eyes sharp with interest. Michael Harris, a businessman seated nearby, quietly pulled out his phone. He pressed record. His face stayed neutral, but his lens followed every word, every gesture. He knew what he was capturing might matter. Helen Brooks crossed her arms, her voice firm again. "This is absurd. You're threatening him for sitting in the seat he paid for. Do you realize how that looks?" Alan's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I need you to stay out of this." "No," Helen shot back. "I don't think I will." The tension rose another notch. Nathan could feel every heartbeat in his chest, but his face stayed calm, his tone low and deliberate. "I'm not moving," he said. "And if you remove me, you'll be removing me from a seat I rightfully purchased, not from a mistake, not from a disruption, but from your own choice to value someone else more than me." Silence followed, thick as fog. Then a man 2 rows back spoke up, his voice carrying the frustration of someone who'd had enough. "He's right. This isn't how it works. You're crossing a line." Nathan could see Alan glance toward Sophie, then toward Bradley, who now looked less amused, more restless. The young man's confidence flickered for the first time. He shifted his weight, tapping his phone nervously against his leg. The crew retreated again, but this time their departure didn't feel like a solution. It felt like regrouping. Nathan leaned back in his seat, muscles tense, eyes forward. The intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice filled the cabin, deliberately calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are resolving a seating issue before departure. Please remain seated." The words were diplomatic, but Nathan heard the subtext. "This is about you. We're framing you as the problem." His chest tightened with a different kind of heat now, not fear, but anger sharpened into resolve. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about dignity being negotiated like a commodity. Minutes passed. Passengers whispered in low tones. Michael's phone kept recording, steady in his hands. Helen gave Nathan a small nod, as if to say, "Hold steady. You're not alone." When Alan Pierce returned, he didn't come alone. He was followed by another uniformed figure, a ground supervisor with a polished badge and a smile that was too pleasant to be genuine. He raised his voice just enough for everyone in first class to hear. "Mr. Cole, we're going to ask you one final time to move to another seat so that we can accommodate our elite member here. If you continue to refuse, we'll have no choice but to remove you from the flight." It wasn't a private request anymore. It was a spectacle, a public shaming. Nathan's hand rested lightly on his folder, his other on the armrest. His voice stayed calm, but carried enough for every ear nearby. "You're asking me to leave the seat I paid for, so someone else can have it, not because of a mistake, but because of who you think is more important. And now you want to make me the disruption for refusing. Is that correct?" The supervisor hesitated, his smile faltering. Murmurs rippled through the rows. A passenger whispered, "This is wrong." Another muttered, "Unbelievable." Bradley shifted again, his smirk fading into something tighter, more forced. Nathan leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now but cutting sharper because of it. "I'm not moving, and the only disruption here is the one you've created." The silence that followed was electric. Passengers looked back and forth, waiting for the next move. Nathan sat back, his eyes steady, his body language unshaken. Inside, his mind was bracing, the knot in his chest wound tight. He knew this wasn't over. They were pushing him toward a breaking point, trying to wear down his calm until he snapped. But Nathan Cole had spent his life learning when to bend and when to hold firm. And this time, he would hold. The hum of the engines grew louder as the cabin door closed, sealing everyone inside. Yet the real noise wasn't mechanical. It was the restless energy of people shifting, whispering, waiting to see what would happen next. Nathan Cole felt it pressing on him from all sides. He sat still, hands resting lightly on the armrests, eyes focused out the window. The world outside looked calm, the last streaks of daylight sinking behind the horizon, but inside, turbulence had already begun. Alan Pierce stood in the aisle, arms crossed, his expression hard. Beside him, Sophie Turner lingered, her polite mask stretched thin. Bradley Stone reclined just far enough back to seem detached, though the smug tilt of his mouth betrayed how invested he truly was. Then Alan raised his voice, projecting across the cabin. "Mr. Cole, refusal to follow crew instructions is grounds for removal from this aircraft. I strongly advise you to comply now, or security will be called to escort you off." The words hit Nathan like cold steel. He knew exactly what Alan was doing, making this public, reframing him as the obstacle, the disruption. It wasn't just about moving a man from one seat to another. It was about shaming him into submission. Before Nathan could reply, Helen Brooks spoke again, her voice ringing with disbelief. "You can't be serious, removing him for sitting in his own seat." "This is shameful." Alan turned toward her sharply. "Ma'am, please refrain from interfering." Helen's chin lifted. "Interfering, no. I'm bearing witness, and so is everyone else in this cabin." A low murmur spread through first class. Some passengers nodded, others shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Michael Harris angled his phone higher, capturing Alan's words with clarity. His live stream ticked upward in viewers, dozens, then hundreds, though no one in the cabin knew yet. Nathan inhaled slowly, fighting to keep his tone even. His thoughts roiled. They want me to snap. They want me to look angry, to make it easy to paint me as the problem. Don't give them that. Stay steady. He leaned forward slightly, meeting Alan's glare. The only instruction I've been given is to surrender a seat I rightfully purchased so that someone else can take it. That's not a safety issue. That's not procedure. That's favoritism dressed as authority. The cabin went silent. Alan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Bradley, impatient, broke in with a scoff. "Man, you're blowing this way out of proportion. It's just a seat. Let's not waste everyone's time." Nathan turned his gaze toward him, calm but unyielding. "If it's just a seat," he said softly, "why don't you take the one they offered me?" The words landed like a strike. Bradley's smirk faltered. Gasps and murmurs rippled across the cabin. Helen smiled faintly, satisfied. Alan clenched his jaw, signaling Sophie. She slipped quickly toward the galley, whispering into the intercom phone. Nathan could feel the shift. They weren't giving up. They were calling in reinforcements. Moments later, the intercom crackled overhead. The captain's voice came on, unusually formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a seating issue that requires immediate resolution. We appreciate your patience as we work with our ground team." Nathan's stomach tightened. They were escalating, pulling authority from the cockpit. The words weren't just procedure. They were warning shots. Helen muttered under her breath, "This is outrageous." Nathan's mind flickered back through decades of moments like this, being told he didn't belong at a country club until he showed his membership card, being ignored at a business dinner until someone realized his name was on the check. Each slight, small, but each one cutting deep. "How many times do you bend before you finally break?" he asked himself. His hand clenched on the armrest, then released. His voice inside was steady. "Not this time. Not again." The forward curtain pulled back, and a new figure entered. The ground supervisor, a man in a navy blazer with a gleaming badge, walked in with a smile too rehearsed to be sincere. "Mr. Cole," he said, voice pitched for the whole cabin. "We need to ask you one final time to relocate. If you choose not to comply, you will be escorted from this aircraft." Dozens of eyes turned toward Nathan, some sympathetic, some expectant, some simply impatient. The weight of their gaze pressed down, a silent verdict forming before he spoke. Nathan set down his folder, straightened in his seat, and looked directly at the supervisor. His voice was calm, carrying clearly without rising. "You're offering to remove me from a seat I purchased to have a conversation about why I should give it to someone else. That's what you're saying, correct?" The supervisor hesitated, his smile faltering. Passengers whispered louder now, "That's not right." Unbelievable. Michael's live stream comments ticked upward fast, words flashing across the screen. "Stand your ground. We're watching. This is discrimination." Bradley's face flushed. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly aware the tide was turning. Nathan leaned forward slightly, his tone low but sharp. "The only disruption here is the one you've created, and everyone here can see it." The silence afterward was charged, every eye on him, every breath held. Alan's jaw flexed. The supervisor shifted uneasily. Even Sophie's mask of professionalism cracked, her face pale. Nathan leaned back again, calm as stone, though his heart pounded in his chest. His thoughts were steel. "They won't break me. Not here. Not now." The engines roared louder, as if impatient for takeoff. But the real storm was inside the cabin. The breaking point had come, and Nathan had refused to bend. The aisle was still. Alan Pierce lingered near the front, arms folded, his eyes on Nathan Cole, as if waiting for him to flinch. The ground supervisor's polite smile had thinned to nothing. Bradley Stone, for the first time, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, though he tried to mask it with a casual lean against the wall. Nathan could feel the pulse of the cabin pressing on him, dozens of strangers watching, silently asking the same question will he give in his hand rested on the armrest. Steady, but inside his thoughts battled. "If I stay silent, they'll label me the problem. If I raise my voice, they'll call me aggressive. Every path they've laid out leads to losing." But there was a third path, one they hadn't considered. Nathan reached slowly into his blazer pocket and pulled out his phone, calmly. Without a word, he tapped a secure app. The screen glowed with a sleek black interface, stamped with the logo of Cole Systems. Few outside the aviation industry knew what that meant, but those who did would understand immediately. The cabin waited, confused. Alan frowned, suspicion tightening his face. Nathan lifted the phone to his ear and spoke with crisp authority. "This is Nathan Cole, CEO of Cole Systems. Connect me to Western Eagle's Operations Center. Flight 782. Now." The words landed like a thunderclap. Heads turned. Passengers blinked in disbelief. Sophie froze halfway down the aisle, her professional mask slipping entirely. Bradley's smirk drained away. Alan scoffed, trying to recover. "Sir, making phone calls at this time." But Nathan's calm voice cut over him, amplified by the hush in the cabin. "I'm not making a call. I'm activating a secure channel. Your airline depends on every single day. The same system that schedules your cruise, tracks your maintenance, and clears your departures." A ripple of murmurs swept through first class. Michael Harris's live stream comments exploded. "What's happening? Is this real? Wait." He runs the system. The phone clicked as the line connected. A voice came through, professional but startled. "Mr. Cole, this is operations. We have you on record. What's the issue?" Nathan spoke clearly, his tone measured. "Pull up Flight 782, confirm my boarding pass for Seat 1A. Then patch me through to Richard Vaughn." Every passenger could hear him. The authority in his tone wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was the kind of authority that comes from knowing you're holding the foundation under someone else's house. Bradley shifted in his seat, his bravado cracking. He looked around, realizing the spotlight wasn't on Nathan anymore. It was on him. Alan's face paled. He opened his mouth, closed it again. For the first time that evening, he had no script. Moments later, a new voice came over the line. Deep, steady, carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "Nathan, This is Richard Vaughn, the CEO of Western Eagle Airlines. His presence landed in the cabin like a hammer. Passengers gasped. Sophie's hand fluttered at her side. Bradley's jaw dropped, eyes wide. Nathan remained calm, though inside he felt a fierce mix of vindication and restraint. This isn't about revenge. This is about truth. "Richard," Nathan said evenly, "your crew has publicly attempted to remove me from my paid seat in favor of another passenger. I've been threatened with removal, humiliated in front of this cabin, and forced to justify my presence in a seat I rightfully purchased. I want you to hear it directly. From me, with every witness present." The silence afterward was so complete, Nathan could hear the faint buzz of the lights overhead. Richard Vaughn's reply came sharp, immediate. "Put Alan Pierce on the line, now." Alan stiffened, fumbling as Nathan extended the phone. His voice trembled as he said, "Yes, sir." Whatever Richard told him was brief, but it turned Alan's face a shade paler with each passing second. He finally handed the phone back to Nathan, avoiding his eyes. "Nathan," Richard said firmly, "my apologies on behalf of Western Eagle. This behavior is unacceptable. Effective immediately." Alan Pierce and Sophie Turner are suspended pending investigation. Bradley Stone will be reseated. "You will remain exactly where you are in 1A, as paid, and I will personally follow up with you tomorrow morning." The cabin erupted, gasps, murmurs, even a smattering of applause. Helen Brooks clapped once, slow and deliberate. "About time," she muttered. Michael's live-stream comments flew across the screen. "Unbelievable. This is justice in real time." He just turned the whole thing upside down. Nathan lowered the phone, his expression composed. He nodded once. "Thank you, Richard." Then he ended the call, slid the phone back into his pocket, and leaned calmly against the headrest. Bradley's face burned red. The young man avoided Nathan's gaze, staring hard at the carpet as if it could swallow him whole. Alan and Sophie moved quickly toward the galley. Their authority evaporated, their steps heavy with shame. The cabin's energy shifted. Where there had been tension, now there was awe, respect, and a current of vindication that ran deeper than the leather seats or the wine glasses. Nathan said nothing more. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any speech. Inside, though, his thoughts turned. This isn't just about me. This is about everyone who's ever been told to move, to wait, to step aside. Tonight, it ends here. But tomorrow, it begins again, and I intend to be ready. The cabin air felt different now. The same fluorescent lights hummed, the same recycled breeze drifted through the vents, but the mood had shifted completely. Where tension once pressed like a weight, there was now a strange blend of quiet awe and electric relief. Nathan Cole remained in his seat, 1A, his seat hands resting lightly on his lap. His face was composed, but inside, emotions pulsed like tides. Anger, yes, but also vindication, and beneath it all, a tired sadness. Why does it always take a spectacle for basic dignity to be respected? He glanced at Helen Brooks across the aisle. She gave him a nod, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes filled with a mix of respect and sorrow. It wasn't just for him, it was for every person she'd likely seen over her decades of life who had been pushed aside, silenced, or diminished. Bradley Stone was no longer lounging in smug confidence. A flight attendant, now trembling slightly, escorted him down the aisle toward economy. His pale blue shirt looked wrinkled under the scrutiny of dozens of eyes. Passengers tracked his walk like an unspoken verdict. Bradley muttered under his breath, but no one sympathized. The young man had lost something greater than a seat. He'd lost the illusion of untouchable privilege. Michael Harris kept filming, whispering into his phone as his live stream chat exploded with reactions. You all saw it. A black CEO, forced to defend his seat, only to reveal he literally runs the systems this airline depends on. They tried to humiliate him, and now look. His voice carried more excitement than he intended, but he couldn't stop. The story unfolding in real time was bigger than anything he'd ever captured. Sophie Turner and Alan Pierce had vanished behind the curtain of the galley, stripped of their roles in an instant. Passengers murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling faintly as though justice had brushed against them too. Nathan shifted slightly, staring out the window. Dallas was shrinking below, the city lights threading patterns across the dark ground. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, but his thoughts weren't done fighting. I could have stayed quiet. I could have moved back to 3C and buried this. But then what? The next man, or woman, or a child who looks like me would face it again. And again. Someone has to stop normalizing it. A gentle voice broke through his reflection. Mr. Cole. It was Helen, leaning slightly toward the aisle. You handled yourself with grace. Not everyone could have done that. Some would have shouted, or stormed off, or given up. You held the line. Nathan smiled faintly. Thank you. But part of me wishes it didn't have to be a line at all. Just a seat. Just fairness. Helen's lips tightened. It always starts small. A seat. A word. A look. But those moments add up. Tonight, you showed them and us that the small things matter. Her words settled on him like balm, soothing, yet heavy. He nodded slowly, appreciating the weight of her perspective. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, clipped but steady. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly. Please fasten your seat belts. The cabin shifted, the familiar routine resuming. But nothing about it felt routine. The passengers in first class stole glances at Nathan, whispers floating like threads of admiration. He hadn't just won a seat. He'd embodied something larger, something people would remember. As the plane began to taxi, Michael's phone buzzed with notifications. His live stream had crossed 50,000 viewers. Comments poured in. This story needs to go national. Respect is priceless. Who is Nathan Cole? Protect this man at all costs. Nathan didn't know the numbers, but he could sense it. The story wasn't confined to this cabin anymore. It was escaping, alive in the world beyond. Inside. Though, he wrestled with a private tension. What now? Will Richard Vaughn follow through tomorrow, or will they try to cover this up, brush it aside with a polished statement? The engines roared as the plane lifted into the sky. The hum filled the silence Nathan carried inside him. He leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the question hang unanswered. For now, he was still in seat 1A. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the first ripple in a storm that had just begun to break. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane leveled off, leaving a soft glow over the first-class cabin. Nathan Cole sat in silence, his body still, but his mind restless. The hum of the engines pressed against his thoughts, giving them rhythm, forcing them forward. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to steady himself. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the hollow echo of exhaustion. Yet his heart would not settle. He had defended his right, exposed their injustice, even forced the hand of the airline's own CEO. But instead of triumph, there was an ache, a familiar one, the ache of being underestimated. Nathan's memory drifted backward, unspooling moments he thought he had tucked away for good. He remembered a boardroom 15 years ago. He had been the youngest man in the room, the only black man, pitching a system he had built from scratch. The investors had looked through him as if he were invisible. One even asked if he was there to assist the real founder. It wasn't until the demo ran flawlessly, every function executing with precision, that their dismissive eyes turned to astonishment. He had won the deal, but the sting of that initial doubt had never left. Another memory. A hotel lobby in Boston. He wore the same kind of navy blazer he wore today, polished shoes, confidence in every step. And still, the concierge had mistaken him for a driver, tossing him car keys with a half-smile. Nathan had stood frozen for a second, the humiliation sharp, before calmly handing the keys back. No scene, no outburst, just silence. The man never apologized. How many times have I chosen silence just to keep the peace, Nathan thought bitterly. How many times did I swallow it, telling myself I'd fight another day, and now tonight another day had arrived. Except this time, he hadn't swallowed it. He hadn't stepped aside. Nathan shifted in his seat, looking across the aisle. Helen Brooks was asleep, her head resting gently against the cushion, her breathing calm. He envied that peace. Michael Harris was still glued to his phone, his whispers low but urgent as he narrated to his viewers. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, and Nathan could almost feel the weight of thousands of strangers watching him in real time. Is this who I am now? A symbol, a headline, a man who had to fight for a seat just to remind the world he belongs here. He ran a hand slowly across his jaw, his voice a quiet murmur only he could hear. I never wanted to be the story. I just wanted to fly home. But beneath that whisper came another voice, one buried deep inside him, forged in the countless battles he had endured. Maybe this is why you're here, not for revenge, not for spectacle, but because someone else, one day, will face the same thing, and they'll need to know it's possible to stand. He exhaled, a slow breath through his nose. His chest loosened, just a little. The flight attendants who remained worked quietly now, avoiding Nathan's row. Their smiles were stiff, their hands slightly shaky as they poured drinks for the other passengers. No one dared approach him, not with anything other than respect. Bradley Stone was somewhere behind the curtain in economy, swallowed by the hum of the larger cabin. Nathan imagined the young man sitting there, fuming, replaying the humiliation in his mind. He wondered if Bradley would learn from it or if entitlement ran too deep to be shaken in a single night. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. Nathan reclined slightly, resting his head back, eyes half closed. The cabin's quiet rhythm lulled him into another memory. This one, gentler. His mother, years ago, holding his hand as a boy while waiting for a bus. A white man had cut in front of them, pretending not to notice. Nathan had frowned, confused, and tugged her sleeve. She had knelt, looked him in the eyes, and whispered, "You are no less than anyone. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Remember that, Nathan. They may not see it, but you must never forget it." That memory clung to him now, wrapping around his chest like armor. He could almost hear her voice echoing over the drone of the engines. He smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed closed. "I didn't forget, Mama. I never forgot." As the plane soared high above the clouds, Nathan drifted into a lighter state of mind, not sleep, but a fragile rest. The storm inside him had quieted, though it hadn't passed. Not yet. Tomorrow would bring questions, headlines, maybe even backlash. But tonight, for these few hours, he had carved out something simple, dignity. And in that fragile rest, Nathan realized something he hadn't allowed himself to before. This wasn't just about his seat. It was about rewriting the story for himself, for everyone watching, and for those who would come after. When the wheels touched down in San Francisco, the jolt through the cabin felt sharper than usual. Nathan Cole's eyes opened slowly, his mind surfacing from the swirl of memories that had carried him through most of the flight. The hum of the engines deepened as the plane taxied, but the air inside the cabin was charged with something far beyond routine. Passengers were restless, whispering, stealing glances at him, some subtle, some not. A few had tears in their eyes, others wore faint smiles, as though they'd witnessed something they'd tell their families about at dinner. Helen Brooks leaned forward slightly, resting her palms on her knees. "We're here," she said softly, her voice carrying both relief and significance. "But I don't think this ends here for you." Nathan gave her a faint nod. "No," he murmured. "This is just the beginning." The seatbelt light blinked off, and people rose slowly, stretching, gathering their bags. But the usual shuffle of first-class disembarkation was broken. Everyone seemed to be waiting, hesitating. Michael Harris had stopped live streaming just before landing, but his phone was buzzing furiously in his hand. He glanced at Nathan, almost apologetically. "Sir, it's everywhere now. The clip of you calling Richard Vaughn. It's viral. We're talking national news outlets already picking it up. People are calling you the man who refused to move." Nathan's lips pressed together in a tight line. He had expected attention, but not this quickly. The fight for one seat had turned into a storm in less than 2 hours. Bradley Stone was nowhere to be seen in first class. He was still in economy, deliberately kept there by the crew, who avoided eye contact with Nathan. Sophie Turner and Alan Pierce had not returned since their suspension order mid-flight. As the door opened and passengers began to file out, Nathan remained seated. He didn't rush, didn't want to join the line of people eager to escape. He let them go first. Some paused as they passed him small gestures, nods, even whispered thanks. "You stood for all of us," one man said quietly before moving on. Nathan simply inclined his head. He didn't need to reply. The meaning hung between them. Finally, he rose, retrieving his carry-on and briefcase. As he stepped into the aisle, Helen touched his arm. "Don't let them spin this, Nathan. Your story matters as it happened, not the way they'll try to rewrite it." Her words stayed with him as he walked down the narrow aisle, his steps unhurried, every motion deliberate. When he emerged into the jet bridge, the sight that greeted him nearly stopped him cold. A cluster of reporters stood beyond the security rope, cameras raised, microphones thrust forward. Airport staff tried to maintain order, but the crowd's energy was undeniable. Nathan Cole. Did the airline try to force you out of your seat? Mr. Cole, how does it feel to expose discrimination in real time? What's your response to Western Eagle's statement? He blinked at that last one. A statement already. Michael appeared behind him. Phone raised again. "It's out, sir." Corporate released a 2-sentence note mid-flight. They called it a misunderstanding. Social media is tearing them apart. Nathan exhaled slowly, fighting the frustration that bubbled up. A misunderstanding. That word again, always that word, like it erases everything. But he kept his face calm, his posture steady. This wasn't the place for fury. It was the place for dignity. He stopped, squared his shoulders, and addressed the microphones with a voice clear and unwavering. I had a confirmed seat. Seat 1A, I was asked, repeatedly and publicly, to move for another passenger because he was considered more valuable. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a choice. And tonight, I chose not to move. The words rippled through the crowd, recorded, broadcast, shared in real time. Nathan saw the flash of cameras, the flicker of lights, the endless recording devices aimed his way, but he felt no fear, only clarity. I believe respect isn't about money, titles or status, he continued. It's about how we treat people when no one is supposed to be watching. Tonight, people were watching, and the truth is now out there. A wave of questions followed, but Nathan raised a hand gently. That's all for now. Thank you. With that, he moved through the throng, his driver waiting just beyond, sliding into the quiet leather interior of the sedan. He finally allowed himself to breathe. The city lights of San Francisco shimmered in the distance. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Rough flight. Sir Nathan chuckled softly, though his eyes were tired. You could say that. Then, after a pause, he added, but maybe it was the right flight. As the car pulled away from the curb, Nathan leaned back, his briefcase resting against his leg. His phone buzzed with messages, his COO, Trevor, his board, reporters, even friends he hadn't spoken to in years. The story was everywhere. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself words that felt both like a burden and a vow. This isn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, Nathan Cole awoke before sunrise. He had slept only in fragments, drifting in and out of rest as his phone buzzed with constant updates. The clip of him refusing to move had climbed into the millions overnight. News anchors debated his name. Commentators argued whether it was about race, class, or entitlement, but Nathan knew the truth. It was about respect. By 7 a.m., his car was gliding through the streets of downtown San Francisco toward Western Eagle Airlines headquarters. The building rose like a glass and steel fortress, reflecting the pale morning sky. Nathan's jaw tightened as he stepped out, briefcase in hand, his tailored suit a shield of composure. Inside, the lobby buzzed with unusual tension. Employees glanced up from their phones, whispering as he passed. Security guards nodded stiffly, recognizing his face from the viral footage. It was as if he had walked into enemy territory, yet carried the power of an army behind him. On the 15th floor, Richard Vaughn awaited him in a sprawling conference room, flanked by board members and senior executives. Richard rose as Nathan entered, his face carefully arranged into a mask of professionalism. Nathan, he said, extending a hand, thank you for coming on such short notice. Nathan shook it firmly. I didn't come for thanks. I came for accountability. They sat. The room fell into a hush. Coffee cups clinked quietly. Pens poised over legal pads, but all eyes were on Nathan. Richard cleared his throat. Let me start by saying last night's events were unacceptable. I issued immediate suspensions for Alan Pierce and Sophie Turner, and I've asked for a full internal review. Nathan's gaze was steady. A review won't undo what happened. Your crew didn't just mishandle a passenger. They humiliated me publicly for no reason other than believing someone else mattered more. That's not a mistake, it's a culture. Murmurs rippled through the executives, but Richard held up a hand. You're right, and we're prepared to issue a formal apology. Nathan leaned forward, his voice quiet but cutting. An apology is words. I want actions. The room stiffened. Richard exhaled slowly. What exactly do you have in mind? Nathan placed his briefcase on the table, clicked it open, and slid a folder across the polished wood. Inside were documents meticulously prepared overnight with help from his COO. Cole Systems powers your operations. Scheduling, crew management, maintenance your airline runs on my software. That means I know exactly where your vulnerabilities are, and I know how fragile public trust is when your name is already being dragged across headlines. The silence was heavy. A board member shifted uncomfortably, her pen frozen mid-air. Nathan continued, his voice calm, steady. I'm not here to destroy Western Eagle, but I am here to make sure no one else experiences what I did. Not on your planes, not in your terminals, not ever again." He let the words hang before outlining his demands. First, mandatory anti-bias and dignity training for every employee, from crew to executives. Second, a zero-tolerance policy with independent oversight, not handled by your HR department. Third, a passenger rights charter, clear, public, enforceable. Fourth, real accountability, not just firing the lowest-ranking employee when things go wrong, but tying leadership bonuses to measurable change. The executives exchanged uneasy looks. One finally spoke. "That's a lot, Mr. Cole. Implementing all of this would take years." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "Your crew took less than 10 minutes to strip me of my dignity in front of a plane full of witnesses. Don't tell me change will take years." Richard pressed his lips together. He knew Nathan wasn't bluffing. He had the leverage, the contracts, the influence, the viral story. If Western Eagle refused, they wouldn't just lose Cole Systems. They'd lose their reputation, their customers, maybe their future. After a long pause, Richard said, "You'll have it, all of it. We'll make the changes, and we'll make them fast." Nathan studied him, searching for sincerity. Finally, he nodded once. "Good. Then maybe Western Eagle can fly with dignity, not just profit." As the meeting adjourned, reporters outside were waiting. Nathan stepped into the flashing lights and microphones with a calm expression. "Mr. Cole." "What was decided?" a journalist shouted. Nathan paused, then spoke clearly. "This wasn't about me. It was about what happens when respect is treated like a privilege instead of a right. Western Eagle has agreed to systemic reforms. I intend to hold them to it. And if they fail well, I've already proven I'm not afraid to stand my ground." Applause broke from some of the onlookers. Others scribbled furiously, capturing every word. As he walked toward his car, Nathan's phone buzzed again. Michael Harris had sent him a message. "The world's still watching. Don't stop now." Nathan allowed himself a small smile. "I don't intend to, for days." The world could not stop talking about Flight 782. Clips of Nathan Cole's calm defiance flooded television screens and social media feeds. Hashtags surged. "He or seat 1A. He or stand with Nathan." Respect over privilege. Talk shows dissected his every word. Commentators debated whether it was race, class, or pure entitlement, but for millions watching, it was simpler. It was dignity. Nathan watched the storm unfold from the quiet of his San Francisco office. The glass walls overlooked the bay, sunlight dancing across the water. His team buzzed with calls from journalists, civil rights groups, even government officials. Cole Systems had never been so visible, and neither had he. But visibility was a double-edged sword. Some praised him as a hero. Others accused him of grandstanding. Anonymous emails arrived with venomous words. Nathan read them all, then set them aside. He had faced worse before, though never on this scale. What mattered was what came next. That morning, Richard Vaughn kept his promise. Western Eagle announced sweeping reforms, mandatory anti-bias training, a new passenger rights charter, and an independent oversight board. More shocking was the final detail: executive bonuses would now be tied to compliance and passenger dignity scores. The press hailed it as unprecedented. Nathan knew it was only a beginning. Late in the afternoon, Helen Brooks appeared at his office. She carried no cameras, no fanfare, just the quiet presence of a woman who had spoken truth at 30,000 feet. "I had to see you," she said warmly as Nathan rose to greet her. "You kept your ground, and you didn't let them bury it in excuses." I wanted to say, "Thank you." Nathan smiled faintly. "No, Helen, I should thank you. You spoke up when they wanted silence. That made all the difference. She touched his arm gently. I'm old enough to know one voice is rarely enough, but sometimes it takes just one to remind others they're not alone. You gave that voice to millions. Her words stayed with him long after she left. That evening, Nathan finally allowed himself a walk along the waterfront. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, families strolling, joggers passing, couples laughing over coffee. Yet he felt something new in the air, subtle but present. Strangers looked at him with recognition, some even offering quiet nods. A man jogging by simply said, "Seat 1A," and kept running. Nathan chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. The seat had become a symbol far larger than the leather cushion he had defended. As he reached a bench overlooking the water, his phone buzzed. A message from Michael Harris, CNN, wants to do a primetime interview. They're calling it The Seat That Changed Aviation. Nathan typed back slowly, "Let's take it one step at a time. This isn't about fame. It's about change." He set the phone aside and let the breeze wash over him. For the first time in days, he felt still. His thoughts drifted again to his mother's words. You are no less than anyone. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. The truth of it resonated deeper now. He had lived those words in silence for decades, carrying them like a private shield. But now, perhaps, the world was ready to hear them too. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Nathan closed his eyes. He thought of the next battle's policy, accountability, culture, but he also thought of hope. Hope that somewhere another man or woman would sit in their rightful seat without question. Hope that a flight attendant faced with a choice would choose fairness without hesitation. Hope that Bradley Stone, wherever he was tonight, might reflect and change, however unlikely it seemed. When he finally rose to leave, Nathan whispered softly, as if to the waves themselves, "Respect is not a privilege, it's a right." And though the noise of the world still roared, in that quiet moment he felt a deeper peace. For dignity had taken flight, and this time it would not be grounded. Life often confronts us with moments that test more than our patience, they test our worth. Nathan Cole's story is not only about a seat on an airplane, it is about the quiet battles each of us faces when others assume we are less than we are. Many older viewers know this truth. Deeply, respect is not given freely. Sometimes it must be insisted upon, even when the cost is discomfort. The lesson here is simple, yet profound. Never let anyone decide your value for you. Nathan did not shout or rage. He stood with dignity, calm but unshakable. That calm strength reminds us that resistance does not always roar. It can whisper firmly, "I belong here, in life." There will always be those who try to push us aside, whether for status, privilege, or prejudice. But we have a choice to yield quietly and carry the weight of silence, or to hold our ground and show others that fairness is not optional. For every older soul who has ever been overlooked, Nathan's story is a reminder that dignity, once claimed, cannot be taken away. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of dignity and respect, we ask you to keep this message alive. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so together we can continue telling stories that inspire hope, spark change, and remind us all of our true worth.